When you watch the mainstream media news, do you feel a little twitch? Is there a tingle in your left hand? Is your jaw locked? We have the solution. Welcome to Reasonable Arguments, the podcast where thoughtful debate meets unfiltered fun. Coming to you from Sarasota, Florida, we mix informed conservative commentary, playful banter, and just the right amount of nonsense to keep it entertaining. This is Reasonable Arguments, and now your host.
We have Rosemary Jenks from the Immigration Accountability Project. We spoke to you, Jamie and I spoke to you, it was a year ago, March 13th. And obviously it feels like everything has changed and kind of blown up in the world as far as immigration is concerned.
Yes, indeed.
What are some of the things that you're seeing that maybe you haven't seen in the past that have escalated now?
One of the big things I think is an increasing recognition that just because some immigration is legal doesn't make it good for America. I think we're seeing that, for example, in the Texas attack over the weekend, where obvious jihadi from Senegal who he actually came on a legal visa, then overstayed the visa, then was given a waiver to become a green card holder because he married a U.S. citizen. But I think that is, and the Somali fraud, all of that is legal immigration. And there is, both in Congress and among the public, I think, an increasing recognition that too much legal immigration is just as bad as illegal immigration.
And you're seeing that from both sides?
Well, not as much from both sides, but definitely among Republicans. I think there are Democrats who are now trying to avoid the issue because they recognize that, they can't keep just blindly defending mass immigration.
Right.
And definitely among the liberal base, there is increasing recognition of this. I think the Democrat Party, the politicians are very much out of step with mainstream American Democrats, which is unfortunate.
You hear everybody saying that it is humanitarian part of it. Why are we going to remove these people that have been here for years just because they didn't come in legally, or they've been here for years, they've established themselves. So it becomes that humanitarian aspect of we shouldn't kick these people out because.
Well, and I think there's a little bit of virtue signaling going on there, because people who came in illegally are taking American jobs. They're costing us money. I mean, we know from the Center for Immigration Studies that more than 50% of them are legal immigrants on welfare programs, and more than that of households headed by illegal aliens are on welfare programs. We, the taxpayers, are supporting them. So do we really want to make the decision that we're going to hurt ourselves and especially hurt the most vulnerable Americans in order to have this, humanitarian view of mass immigration? People who came here unlawfully don't have any right to be here. Actually, nobody but U.S. citizens has a right to be here. We get to decide who we allow in and who is allowed to stay. And we have not been making that decision carefully for about 5 decades now. And the problems related to that are coming home to roost.
But they say they're not collecting welfare. Like that's the big argument. They have these jobs, they pay into taxes that they're never going to get through Medicare, through Social Security, through whatever. But the argument is always out there that they do not collect welfare.
Yeah, and that it's simply not true, because first of all, a lot of them have US born children. And so they collect welfare on behalf of those children because of our birthright citizenship policy. But the other thing is that there are a lot of state welfare agencies and in some cases federal welfare agencies, including, for example, housing and urban development, where they haven't been doing proper vetting. And so illegal aliens absolutely have been getting these services. But the other thing, when you talk about Social Security and Medicare, if you look at the average income of illegal aliens as a whole, I mean, these are people who have an average education level of about 10th grade. So they're not making high wages. They're in low skill, low wage jobs. That means that for the estimated 50% who actually file income taxes, their income is so low that not only do they not owe taxes, but they're getting tax refunds. So we are paying them. Yes, they're contributing to Social Security in minimal amounts because of their low incomes, and the same with Medicare, but they're not paying enough to cover their own costs. And if an illegal alien has a single child in public education, they're not even coming close to covering their own costs.
How do we, how do you get people to understand this? Because I used the analogy on a Facebook post one day saying, because the woman was arguing with me saying that they bring in $14 trillion worth of tax, money into taxes and things like that. And I said, well, you have to look at it like this. If you're budgeted for a family of four but your kid has six of their friends hiding out in the attic that you don't know anything about, and your food's going missing, your electric bill's going up, your water bill's going up, all of these things are changing and you have no idea why. It's kind of like the same thing. That's the simplest way that I could explain it to somebody to try to get them to understand. But how do we make people understand this, that it is truly costing us money?
Well, I think that, the big problem is there are some outfits out there who have a very big financial interest in obfuscating all of this. And so they put out these fancy looking studies that pretend that illegal aliens and immigrants in general are paying their own way, where they're actually ignoring a lot of the costs. And, if you think about it, the average American who is in a low wage job is not paying his way either. That is something that we as Americans have accepted, that we're going to have a progressive tax rate so that the wealthier pay more and that the poor don't pay as much, and we make welfare services available to the poor. So it's not that illegal aliens are different from other human beings. It's that they are, by and large, have very low education rates and make very low incomes. And if they have American born children, those children are entitled to every single welfare program we have. And so, they're going to consume basically exactly the same way that a poor American consumes. But in my view, our duty is to the poor American, not to the illegal alien who broke our laws to get here.
Right. Right. And I agree with you. All right. So I want to talk about you for a little bit. So, because you have been doing this for, I think you said it was well over 30 years, right? I can't even imagine the things that you've seen throughout your time. So, what are some of the accomplishments that the Immigration Accountability Project has seen?
We've actually seen a lot of kind of smaller victories that are important, but that most of the public doesn't know about. For example, in the past year, we actually spotted a provision in an appropriations bill in Congress that had 70,000 extra visas for Afghan special immigrants. So importing 70,000 more Afghans than we already have here. And we flagged that for Republican leadership in the House and the Rules Committee and the White House. And it was actually taken out of the bill before the bill was passed on the floor. So things like that,
Wow.
that because we've been doing this so long and know where to look in these giant 1,000-page pieces of legislation, it turned out that the leadership didn't even know this provision was in there. And it would have passed had we not seen it. Things like that. We also prevented a quadrupling of the H-2B visa program, which is for temporary non-agricultural foreign workers to come in and take jobs at resorts and ski lodges and landscaping and places like that. And, Congress, there are actually a bipartisan group in Congress that is absolutely intent on replacing low wage Americans and high school students with foreign workers because they're cheaper. And so, they try this every year, and every year we have to fight back against it. And we were successful in minimizing the damage on that one. But I think more important than that is that we have more and more members of Congress who are actually introducing game-changing legislation. Like, for example, Chip Roy has introduced a bill called the Pause Act that is actually a moratorium on legal immigration, everything except tourist visas, until certain criteria are met, including that birthright citizenship is ended, that Sharia law is barred, that the president's H-1B fee is codified. So there are all kinds of criteria where legal immigration is paused until these things are fixed and chain migration ended. And then I think we're going to see increasing efforts to rein in the H-1B program, things that Republicans have, that neither party, quite frankly, has ever considered doing before, because they're recognizing that mass immigration is too much.
I guess it's good to hear that. I mean, as long as both sides are understanding that. But what is happening at the borders right now?
President Trump has done an amazing job at the border in closing the border. There are still people trying to come across. There are still illegal aliens getting caught and returned to their home countries or put back across the border into Mexico and Canada. So it's not 100% sealed, but it's obviously a whole lot closer to that than it was over the Biden administration. One of the problems that we still have is because Congress has done absolutely nothing on any of this with unaccompanied alien children. If they get across the border, still by law the Border Patrol has to turn them over to Health and Human Services, and then Health and Human Services farms them out to sponsors who, presumably the Trump administration is doing a better job of vetting, but under the Biden administration, they were being turned over to child traffickers and labor traffickers and sexual abusers and so on. So that's still a problem because Congress hasn't fixed the loophole in the law that would shut that down.
Why would that even be a problem to do that? I don't understand that.
It shouldn't be a problem to do that. And it was actually in the Republican signature border security bill last Congress, H.R. 2, a provision to fix that. And it passed the House, but of course died on Chuck Schumer's desk last Congress. I'm not sure why Congress hasn't passed that bill again this Congress. They need to. There are a lot of loopholes in the law that need to be fixed. And, one of the things that would make a giant impact on the asylum problem is a safe third country provision in the law. So if you pass through a safe third country that has an asylum system, you're disqualified from applying for asylum here. That's what the European Union countries do. They have an agreement that once a potential migrant gets into one of the countries, they can't just keep going to essentially shop for asylum. So we need to do that in our own country. There are ways that we can do it now, but only if we have a specific bilateral agreement with the pass-through country, and that's just not good enough. So, there are numerous things that actually need to be fixed. Obviously, we need to fix sanctuary cities, and we have a provision in federal law that says that no state or locality can implement policies that prevent communication between law enforcement and ICE. That is routinely violated. But the problem is there are no teeth in the law. So there's no enforcement mechanism to actually hold these jurisdictions accountable when they implement these policies.
So, and this may not even be a question that you can answer, but in light of everything that's happened in Minnesota, why don't ICE agents have body cams?
The ones in Minnesota do. All of them apparently now in Minnesota do have body cams. So what's interesting is that ICE has actually been asking for body cams for years, and they just started getting funded for them, I think, last year or maybe it was the year before. And so they're slowly being doled out. But, it's down to Congress having to fund body cameras. So the thing is that body cameras are usually desirable on the part of the police because they know that 9 times out of 10 or better, what they're doing is correct and they're being attacked or assaulted or whatever, and the body cams will show that. So most law enforcement officers actually want the body cameras. It's a matter of funding. And, Congress funds ICE. So it's got to come from Congress. The most ironic thing is that the Department of Homeland Security funding bill that the House passed last year, and then the Senate Democrats were going to pass, but then when Preddy was shot in Minneapolis, they decided that they were not going to fund DHS. That bill actually had full funding for body cams for ICE
Wow.
and CBP. So they just shot themselves in the foot with that.
So, what policy or legal change are you most proud of influencing?
I'm not sure that there is one yet. We've had small victories along the way, but our mission is to actually fix the legal immigration system and stop illegal immigration, and we're not there. So, until we can get uh, one of the bills that I wrote probably 20 years ago now is called the Nuclear Family Priority Act, and Eli Crane from Arizona has introduced it this Congress. It would end chain migration. That would have a big impact because the fact that you can come here as an immigrant and then import your entire extended family is ridiculous because we don't have any choice in selecting those immigrants. It's all based on a familial relationship. We actually absolutely believe that nuclear family should be able to come, spouses and minor children. We should
Mhm.
keep them together. We have an interest in keeping nuclear families together. But beyond that, we don't have an interest. And so something like that bill or a bill to end the visa lottery, a moratorium bill would be fantastic. If your basement is flooding, the first thing you do is shut off the water and then you clean up the mess. So shutting off the valve of immigration is kind of the first step at this point, since we are so overloaded, so that we can sort out, where are the terrorists? We know that the Biden administration let terrorists, known people who are on the terrorist watch list, into our country. Where are they? We need to find them. We need to figure out the Somali fraud program. And I guarantee you, Somalis are not the only ones committing fraud on
Right.
in our country. So we've got to find all that and sort it out before the American people are going to trust that the immigration system actually serves our interests.
So, how many people are actually working on the immigration issue? And I know that that sounds like a weird question, but like because I know of a few groups that we've interviewed people on last year, but how many organizations are there that are working on this? Because it seems like it's something that's never going to, it's always going to be a problem, right? Because it hasn't been fixed forever. How many people are there?
Well, let me start with how many people are on the other side. And that is virtually all of the elites in America. There are hundreds and hundreds of organizations funded by the George Soroses and the Ford Foundation and all these various, giant money groups, big agriculture, the Chamber of Commerce, the big religion, the Catholic Charities, and all of these groups that have a direct financial interest in either cheap labor or bringing in new voters, basically.
So is it not when you say Soros, I automatically think open society. So do you think it is more about the voting and all of that, or do you think that he is still interested in having that open society environment?
I think it is more about replacing the voters he doesn't like. I think that Americans have a lot of common sense and they start to recognize when things are set up against them. And we've gotten to that point. And, I think there are people who actually want to destroy America, who want to tear it down and who want to make it into some kind of global marketplace, both Republicans and Democrats. And so this is a David and Goliath fight. And our side is, for the last 40 years or so, has been a very small number of organizations, like maximum 8 or 9. And the other side has giant resources and giant numbers of organizations. I mean, we actually are part of a new coalition called the Mass Deportation Coalition, and our goal is to present policy options for the Trump administration to actually get to mass deportation, since he promised that in the campaign. And I'm amazed at how many different kinds of organizations are actually joining us. Like, we have a whole bunch of college Republicans organizations joining. And these are people who have never been involved in the immigration debate before. And they're coming in on this because they're recognizing, especially young people, they're recognizing that mass immigration presents a real problem for their future. They're not going to be able to compete with cheaper foreign labor for jobs, and yet they're still expected to pay the taxes that will subsidize the cheap foreign labor. So I'm very encouraged by that kind of thing. Charlie Kirk is one of those people who initially, when he started out, he didn't really talk about immigration at all. And then he went to illegal immigration. And by the end, he was talking very freely about the need to reduce legal immigration, and that in so many ways, it actually is harming us, and especially harming young people.
I try to talk to people to try to make them understand. How would you open your door and let anybody come in that needed a house, needed food, needed whatever? And yeah, you may do that for a time or two, but then what's going to happen? I'm really finding it hard to understand if we are truly in a world where everybody just hates Trump and wants to go against everything he's saying, or if they truly in their hearts believe that bringing all these people into our country is a benefit. And I just find that really hard to believe. But I don't think right now we are really going to get a real answer from anybody until Trump is out of office.
Yeah, there is definitely a lot of Trump derangement going on, and kind of that knee-jerk reaction. Well, if Trump wants it, I don't.
Mm.
And that's unfortunate. And you're right. There are people who think that just open up the borders to the world and everything will be fine. They haven't thought that through, clearly. But, another person in the Trump administration who I have been just so impressed with is Marco Rubio, Secretary of State. I mean, I am just blown away by the factual statements that he is making about things like, if you come to our country as a guest and you show that you're anti-American, we're going to revoke your visa. I mean, that's just common sense.
And he's an immigrant. He's from his family.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just am really impressed with him and the fortitude that he has shown in just stating factually that immigration is not a right, it's a privilege. And if you violate that privilege, we're going to send you home. We need more of that.
Right. I agree with you. One of the things when Doge started, and this is just how I think. Like, I'm a visual person. So when Jamie and I used to do the podcast, I used to say that when everybody was getting upset when they talked about USAID and where all the money was going, I said it would be really great to have like a virtual wallet for every American. And in that virtual wallet, say you're given $1 million at the beginning of each term, and you see that money dwindle, and it tells you where it's going. So you have $10 million or however much of your money is going to the Sesame Street thing in Iran. Okay. That type of thing. It would be great if we could do the same thing for immigration, where we could literally show people every time money is taken from them to give to an illegal alien.
Yes. Yeah, it would be amazing, and people would be furious. Which is
Yes.
exactly why it's never going to happen.
Yeah, because people are so for it when directly affecting them. And, until it does, it's just one of those things.
Well, and the other side of that is, if we could make the elites, the business owners who hire illegal aliens, the wealthy people who want the cheap nannies and the cheap landscapers, if we could make them pay the actual costs of these illegal aliens that they're hiring, that would make a huge difference too, because they would no longer be profiting off not hiring Americans. If they had to pay the education of the children of the illegal aliens and the healthcare and all of the expenses that we pay for, including things like infrastructure and other kind of public resources, illegal aliens drive on our roads and our bridges, and yet they're not paying for them. We are. So if we could find a way to balance that out and make the elites pay the actual costs of their so-called cheap labor, it would no longer be cheap labor, and they would be much more willing to hire Americans.
But there's no way to even get account of that, right?
I mean, there are studies that, like the Center for Immigration Studies and the Heritage Foundation have done studies on the costs, and the Federation for American Immigration Reform, they've all done studies on the costs of illegal aliens, including things like infrastructure and criminal justice and all of these different systems, and then also accounted for the taxes that they pay in. I mean, if you could, it would be a rough estimate, but if you could break that down to a per capita basis and then apply it to the employers and the wealthy people who want their cheap nannies, it would at least come close to getting that cost right.
What about finding those people? I mean, are those people, do we know how many there are in that aspect of working with the elites?
I think we have a rough idea based on the Census Bureau's community. They do reports in between the censuses where basically they're looking at how many people are having babies in hospitals. So, assuming if an illegal family is here, that they'll show up either in the hospital records or enrolling in public education or enrolling in some kind of welfare plan. So there are ways to get at the total number of illegal aliens. There are also surveys. I know the Center for Immigration Studies has done this to estimate how many illegal aliens are in each industry in America.
Okay.
And to no one's surprise, agriculture is one of the big ones. But in every industry, I think except agriculture, Americans are still the majority of the workers in every industry. And even in agriculture, Americans plus legal immigrants are the majority of agricultural workers. So
Okay.
there's no industry where illegal aliens make up a majority. So these people who say, the sky is falling if you deport all these people, it's
Yeah.
just true. Will there be disruptions? Yes. If we could snap our fingers and deport every illegal alien right now, yes, there would be economic disruptions. But first of all, that's never going to happen. It's a process that takes time. So just as employers got used to having illegal labor, they will get used to not having illegal labor.
I know you've testified before Congress many times, and I know one of the ones that you had recently was about E-Verify.
Yes.
And I know that there's a lot of confusion about E-Verify. So can you please talk about that?
Sure. E-Verify is an online system that was created in the 1996 immigration law. It was started as a pilot program and then it became a permanent program. It is not mandatory, it is volunteer at this point, but it is a free system that employers can use to verify the work authorization of new hires. It can only be used on a new hire. So when an employer who's not using E-Verify hires someone in America, that employer is required to fill out what's called the I-9 form. And that is basic personal identifying information. And then the employee has to prove their identity. They have to show a document that proves identity, and they have to show a document that proves work authorization. So for most Americans, that means a driver's license and a social security card, or a passport proves both. For foreigners, non-citizens, that would be either a green card, which proves both, meaning they're a lawful permanent resident, or if they're a temporary worker or in some other immigration status, it would be their visa, like they could show a foreign passport plus an employment authorization document. So when an employer signs up for E-Verify, he or she just types in the information that's on that nine form into this internet-based system and hits send. So it's basically name, birth date, and then the document numbers. Hit send, social security number, because everyone who's working here has to have a social security number. And within seconds, literally almost instantly, gets back an answer that says work authorized or tentative non-confirmation. If it's a tentative non-confirmation, then the system tells the employer exactly what he has to do. Usually it's because it's a woman who changed her name after she got married and didn't change it with the Social Security Administration, something like that. Then they have 10 days to fix it. But essentially, the system first pings the Social Security database to see if the name, birth date, and Social Security number all match. If they do match, it sends back that it's confirmed. If there is a foreign document inputted, then it pings the Department of Homeland Security's databases and checks that, again, the name, the birth date, and the document number match. So in 98 point something, I can't remember the point, whatever it is, percent of cases, it's an instant verification. So it's not a burden on employers. It takes literally 2 minutes to type in the information and get the response in 98 point something percent of cases.
So why are people so up in arms about it?
There's a lot of misinformation and a lot of confusion about what it actually is. There are people who believe that E-Verify is a database, that the Department of Homeland Security is keeping a database of all Americans and therefore can say, we don't like your politics, so we're not going to let you get a job. That is absolutely not true. There is no E-Verify database. It is just a system that pings other existing databases, SSAs and DHSs. There are people who don't understand the actual accuracy of the system and that it gives you a response immediately. What's amazing to me is I have debated E-Verify with countless people on the other side of the issue over the years. And every time I say, have you actually used E-Verify? Inevitably, the response is no, of course not. I'm like, well, then how do you know? I've actually used E-Verify. When the system went nationwide in 2005, I insisted that the company I was working for start using E-Verify because, it's kind of our mission. And so I made sure that I was the one actually doing the checks because I wanted to know exactly how it worked. And it is literally the easiest system ever. I never had any kind of glitches. I never had any trouble at all with it. And it was just so fast and easy.
And there's no way you can do a presentation in front of Congress, I guess, to show how easy it is.
I actually have offered so many people, even in state legislatures, I've said, look, if you want a demonstration, I will put you in contact with the person at DHS who can come out to your state and give you a demonstration. And sometimes they say yes, and mostly they just ignore me. But, what's funny is that Congress actually uses it. Every congressional staffer has to go through E-Verify.
Oh my goodness. So we know that media fire people up in everything that they report, wrong or not wrong, whatever. But what is something your organization had to correct?
I mean, it's every day. Every day I'm looking through, whatever comes across my desk and thinking, well, that's not right. Why would they say that? And I just move on because I'm so sick of it.
I hear you. I can't even imagine. What resistance have you faced from lawmakers or agencies when pushing for enforcement?
There's a lot of resistance from lawmakers among Democrats primarily. There is some among Republicans. I actually just recently had a huge fight on social media with Congressman Don Bacon from Nebraska because he is a co-sponsor of Maria Salazar's big amnesty bill. And of course, he didn't want to call it amnesty. And so I was calling it amnesty. And he got so mad and was just irate about, well, you're the ones talking about amnesty. And I'm like, well, you're the one who signed the bill. But yeah, there are, in my mind, that's a cheap labor issue. I think that one of the biggest problems we have is that so many of the political donors actually use cheap illegal labor.
Yeah.
Or let me just say cheap foreign labor, because some of them rely on H-1Bs, some of them use various other kinds of cheap foreign labor. And they are a giant impediment because they're the ones donating to the campaigns. So how does a member of Congress say, okay, I'll take your money, but I'm not going to go along with your views?
Yeah.
Some of them do, God bless them, but a lot of them don't. A lot of them are far too swayed by those donors. And with Democrats, I think it's a mixed bag of motivations. I think there are some, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, who I think just really hate America. There are others who really want to use the foreign born population to increase their representation under the census. The apportionment, it has a massive impact on apportionment. So states like California would lose a whole bunch of seats, and Florida would gain one or two seats if we didn't count illegal aliens in the census.
Hmm.
So that's a huge political football that they all have their eyes on. I mean, Yvette Clarke, who is I think she's still the head of the Congressional Black Caucus, actually said in a podcast that she wants more illegal aliens in her district because she needs them for apportionment. Well,
Wow.
I mean, some of it's just ridiculous. But yeah, I think when President Trump was promising mass deportations when he was running for president, there were all those, I think it was actually at the convention where all the people had the signs that said mass deportations.
Hmm.
We're all excited about it. The reality of mass deportations was always going to be harder than the slogan because you're talking about actual people. It's harder to deport grandma than it is to hold up a sign. And the bottom line is if you want to incentivize self deportations, you have to deport grandma. It has to be clear that every illegal alien in this country is at risk of being apprehended and removed. Otherwise, why would they leave?
That's true.
So it can't just be the worst of the worst, which is what the campaign has been so far, to take out the worst of the worst criminals. That's good. We need to do that, but that can't be the extent of it, or we're never going to get increased self-deportations. And if you look at the fact that every deportation costs us on average $17,000 and usually several months, it's a huge expense. And the only way to avoid that is to encourage
Did
self-deportation.
we have a big following with that when they were doing the self deportation? Is that still in effect?
We're still offering, I think it's $2,600 now, plus the plane ticket. It's not being used as much as we would have hoped. But, if you look at actual formal deportations in 2025, it was only about 350,000. So, and it's because of the tactics that they're using in going after individual criminal aliens, because they identify the criminal alien, then they have to go target him, find out where he lives, go target him, bring a whole bunch of agents to that community, find him, arrest him, and then start the process of removing him. So it's an individualized thing. Whereas if they were doing worksite enforcement, for example, if they go onto a farm or into some warehouse situation or whatever the work site is, they can take fewer agents per person to make the arrest, and they can round up a whole lot more people in one location that's, not on a public street in the middle of Minneapolis.
Right.
It doesn't have protesters around. So that would be a faster way to ramp up the numbers. And also, if you're targeting people, illegal aliens at their work site, that message gets around, right? And we all know that the vast majority of illegal aliens came here to work. So if you make work a dangerous place, not physically dangerous, but dangerous in terms of apprehension,
Right.
you're much more likely to encourage self-deportation.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So when like with Minneapolis, I get this question a lot about when talking about immigration and the way that ICE is handling everything and why are they taking grandma? Why are they the little boy in the bunny hat and all of that? Is that because sanctuary cities and the local law enforcement do not work hand in hand with ICE? So they have to basically enter these neighborhoods. And I kind of use the analogy like I'm in Florida. We don't hear anything about ICE because our local law enforcement works with them. So they're not rummaging through our neighborhoods looking for people. They're picking up who they need to and moving on. And is that the reason? Because the local law enforcement is not working with ICE.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, if you're going after criminal aliens, there are two ways to find them. You find them in a local jail or a state penitentiary, or you go into the community and track them down where they live, right? So if state and local law enforcement cooperate, the single ICE officer can go to the jail and, at the alien's time of release and pick up the alien knowing he's not armed because he's been in jail.
Mhm.
And it's safe for everyone. It's safe for the alien. It's safe for the ICE officer. And put him in a car, take him to the detention facility, and then do the removal process. If you don't cooperate, then ICE's only option for picking up that criminal alien is to figure out where he lives or where he works or where he hangs out and go there and basically watch for him, wait for him, and then chase him down and arrest him. Which, if he's in a house with a bunch of other people, ICE is going to check who they are. So if they're also illegal aliens, even if they're grandma or little kids, they're going to get picked up too. So the sanctuary cities, that is another irony. The sanctuary cities are actually creating a situation where more illegal aliens are going to be yeah. So, but I want to say very clearly, it's not enough for us to just go to the jails and the prisons to pick up criminal aliens if we want mass deportations, because the numbers are still going to be relatively small compared to the population. If you think about the fact that under the Biden administration, somewhere around 15 million illegal aliens came into the country, the convicted criminal population who's going to be in the jails is a very small percentage of that. So if we want to get to the rest, we're going to have to figure out other tactics. And, I think that worksite enforcement needs to be one of those.
I don't understand why people would, number one, want to protect, especially the criminals. It's mind-blowing of them going out and protesting and putting themselves in harm's way and just doing all of these things. I'm so shocked by it all. I don't understand it. Let's talk about asylum. So we do open up our borders for people that are coming here looking for asylum. What is the timeline with that happening? Like, because I know there's proof. They have to show proof that they are in some kind of trouble or having trouble or could be in danger. How does that work?
So it's not actually proof that they have to show. They have to make a credible claim. So the basics are that we signed an international agreement, the Vienna Convention on Refugees, that says that anyone who arrives in our country and says that they fear persecution by their home government cannot be returned to that home government. Right. And it's persecution on the basis of race, religion, political opinion, something else. It's very specific. So if a person shows up at the border and says, I'm from Iran and I have a well-founded fear that the government of Iran is going to murder me if you send me home, you have to let me stay. I want asylum. Then that person goes before an asylum officer and has to present a credible fear, basically just a, story that is somewhat believable about why they'll be persecuted if sent home. After that, they're released into the country. They're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be detained until a decision is made, but instead they're released and given a work permit, and they file an asylum application. And then at this point, the backlog is somewhere around 10 years.
Wow.
They'll actually go before an immigration judge. And it's in the removal process. Like, we actually start the removal proceedings, and it's in those proceedings before a judge where they say, you can't remove me. Here's my application for asylum. Here's why I will be persecuted when I go home. And then the judge makes the decision. The vast majority of asylum cases are denied because the vast majority of people who come here and claim asylum are only claiming asylum because the cartels they paid to smuggle them into the United States told them how to do it and told them the magic words. They all know the word asylum. Doesn't matter what language they speak, where they're from. When they get to that border, they know the word asylum. The Trump administration has done several things. First of all, it reopened the Remain in Mexico program. So people who claim asylum here are being sent back to Mexico to wait for the whole process to play out. They can give their credible fear, and then they're told to remain in Mexico until a judge is available to have that hearing. In those cases, I think that they're being prioritized with the judges, so it won't be 10 years, but it will be a significant wait in Mexico. And a lot of them, as soon as they're told they have to wait in Mexico, they just give up and go home because, of course, the point was not that they are eligible for asylum. The point was to get into the United States and get a work permit.
Wow. So how frequently are like work visas being handed out now? Is it still the same process, or has that changed since Trump now?
It is the same process, but the numbers are dramatically reduced. So very few people have been coming to the border and claiming asylum. Very few people are crossing the border illegally. And those who are, if you remember under the Biden administration, there would be these huge groups of like 200 people who would cross the river, usually in Texas, all together and turn themselves into the Border Patrol. Those are the ones who were coached to claim asylum. And they were told, if you just go find a Border Patrol, the Border Patrol will release you into the United States and you'll get a work permit. And that was absolutely true under the Biden administration. Under the Trump administration, that stopped immediately because it was very clear that Trump was not going to allow that to happen. So the people who are trying to come into the country illegally now are trying to evade the Border Patrol. They're either drug smugglers, traffickers, cartel members, criminals, gang members. These are the people who don't want to get caught. So there isn't this big push for fraudulent asylum claims anymore. What is happening more is that when ICE actually apprehends an illegal alien in the United States, when they get to the judge for their removal proceeding, that's when they're saying, you can't send me home. I need asylum. And then, coming up with a story to fit that. And again, the vast majority of them are being denied, but they're trying it as a stall tactic.
Do you see that more immigrants are showing up for their hearings, or is this just like where they're here and they're just gonna kind of just hide and
Yeah,
fly below the radar?
the bottom line is, and there are statistics that I can't cite to you because I don't remember them to back this up, but aliens who are detained pending any adjudication are much more likely to actually be removed in a rapid manner. Aliens who are not detained do not show up for the most part.
Okay.
Because why would they?
So you hear these stories all over the news where ICE went into a hearing, so an immigrant was in at the hearing and they got taken from that. How often is that really happening?
So that it's not a lot, but it's notable because it's never really happened before. And what is actually happening in those cases is USCIS is the agency, US Citizenship and Immigration Services is the agency within DHS that decides on green cards and other like visa extensions and other naturalization, all that kind of stuff. So what will happen is an applicant will come up on somebody's desk at USCIS, say, for example, someone who has applied to become a citizen, and the adjudications officer will do the paperwork on that person and find, oh, this person has a criminal warrant for whatever, or this person has been using welfare illegally for however many years, or something, marriage fraud in the background, something that triggers a flag. And so the USCIS officer will actually schedule the interview so that the person is scheduled to come in, and they will have an ICE officer waiting because that person has either violated a visa, committed a crime, or done something else that makes him or her ineligible to stay here. And so they have an ICE officer there to pick them up and take them out and remove them.
Well, they definitely don't show it that way on the news.
Of course not. Of course
My
not.
God. That's insane. It just
The story of the guy from Ireland very recently who, he's been living here for 26 years and he's married and he's, all this. He's from Ireland, for crying out loud. Yeah. He overstayed his visa 20 years ago. He was here illegally for 20 years and he was wanted for drug crimes in Ireland. I mean,
my God.
things that the media just conveniently leaves out are amazing.
Yeah, the most important part for sure. What do both parties refuse to admit about immigration?
I think it's different for both of them. I think that the Republicans still really don't want to admit that they have a cheap labor problem. And I think the Democrats largely don't want to admit that. I'm torn on this. I think some of them don't want to admit that immigration is changing America, and the others don't want to admit that that was the purpose all along. So it is very interesting because just like any other public policy, immigration policy is supposed to serve America's interests, right? It's just a public policy. So why is it that we literally have never looked at it as just a regular public policy? What kind of immigration policy would actually serve Americans' interests? And somehow it's racist or xenophobic or something to do that. And both sides of the aisle are scared somehow to address this, to really take a good look at what is the purpose of immigration? What do we expect immigration to do for America? If it's a good thing, then we should be willing to say that. And if it's a bad thing, we don't want it to happen, so let's fix it.
Right.
But we're not yet able to have that kind of honest debate because of it involves ethnicities and races and so on, and class warfare and all this, who do we want to come in and who don't we want? And is it because of nefarious motives and all of that? And we need to get past that because we really need to have this debate. We really need to talk about what our immigration policy should be, what will actually serve Americans, and, how do we cut out the parts that don't help us?
I'm sure you've had 30 plus years to think about this, but if you were in charge of fixing the immigration issue, how would you do it?
At this point, after the 4 years of the Biden administration, I would pass a moratorium and I would stop everything and spend some time, first of all, sorting out who is here, who should be here, who shouldn't be here, making sure that the people who should not be here leave, and then actually talking to the American people to figure out what policies should come next. In my view, we have an interest in keeping, as I said, keeping nuclear families together. So I would allow in spouses and minor children of citizens and lawful permanent residents. I think that we should do that. We should talk about a refugee program because the studies from the Center for Immigration Studies show that we could help 12 refugees abroad for every single refugee we bring here.
Mm.
So we could do a whole lot more humanitarian good if we cared for them closer to their home countries rather than resettling them here. I think that's a conversation we should have. We should talk about a merit-based system. Do we need certain skills in this country? Do we have enough Americans who have those skills or can get those skills? What kind of sort of employment-based immigrants do we actually need without hurting American workers? Do we need any? It's a question we should ask. So that's where I would go with it.
Why is the US so different? Like, there's no other country that you can walk in through the borders, live in a house, get a job, get welfare if you need it. There's no other country that will allow you to do that. Why are we different?
Part of it is the whole we're a nation of immigrants kind of ethos. But, in reality, there are other countries where you can do this. Most of Europe, you can do this. They use the pretend asylum seeker thing. We do that to some degree here, but we have had in the United States, not just the asylum, and we actually have a much lower asylum problem, or we did until Biden, than Europe because we're surrounded by water primarily. We have Mexico and Canada, but that's only two countries. In Europe, you're surrounded by a lot of other countries. But the bottom line is that we have had an extraordinarily generous legal immigration system really throughout our history. We're desperate for newcomers when we were settling the West, right? So from our very beginning, we were trying to attract people to the United States to help build the country. And then in 1924, we decided that we'd had enough of that and we clamped down for a little while. And then after, the civil rights era is when we basically opened up the doors again with legal immigration. And it's just been going up and up and up since then because it was turned into a civil rights issue. You
Right.
increase diversity and multiculturalism and, all of this stuff. Um, and we have failed to kind of turn that ship around and say, wait a minute, this isn't really a civil rights issue. This is an issue about what's good for our own country. I don't personally care what race or ethnicity the people coming here are. I just want the numbers down.
Right.
So until we can kind of take that civil rights coloring out of it, we're not going to be able to have an honest debate about
Well,
this
and
issue.
the Constitution says persons, not immigrants.
Right.
So they're covered. They say that everybody says they're covered under that for due process.
Well, and the courts have been relatively clear on due process for aliens. And you notice throughout this interview, I've been calling them illegal aliens,
Mhm.
immigrants, because those are actually legal words. You are either a lawful permanent resident, which is an immigrant, or you are a non-immigrant, which is a legal visa holder, or you are an unlawful alien, illegal alien.
So undocumented is just a pretty word.
It's nonsense because I guarantee you that every one of those supposedly undocumented aliens has plenty of documents. They may be stolen, they may be fake, they may be from the home country, but they're documented.
Right.
Yeah, so that there are different levels actually of due process based on who the person is and what their immigration status is. So, for example, the Supreme Court has consistently held that the removal process, the deportation process, is a civil enforcement process. So you don't have Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment rights in that because it's not a criminal process. So if it's a civil enforcement process, essentially it's DHS enforcing a civil regulation. So if we wanted to charge every illegal alien with a crime, because if you cross the border illegally, you have committed a crime. But generally, in order to deport them faster, we don't charge them with the crime. We simply enforce the civil violation part of it. So that's why we don't need a judicial warrant to go after them in their homes. We need an administrative warrant because it's an administrative process to remove them.
Okay.
There are distinctions. It is absolutely not that every single human being who steps foot in the United States is entitled to all of our constitutional protections. That's just not right.
In doing research today, something about the Jordan Commission came up, and it just seemed very interesting to me. And I would love to hear more about this if you don't mind.
The Jordan Commission is one of the best, most in-depth studies of our immigration policy that's ever been done. Barbara Jordan was the first Black woman representative from Texas. She was a civil rights leader. Bill Clinton appointed her as chairwoman of the Commission on Immigration Reform, and she studied the issue. She brought in testimony from every perspective, She looked at the impact on wages, on working conditions, on, legal versus illegal, the entire immigration system, and came out with a big book of recommendations for Congress. The commission recommended that illegal immigration be stopped, that E-Verify be mandatory, that legal immigration be reduced by about a third by ending chain migration and by getting rid of the visa lottery. And she said, one of her quotes, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to remember it directly, but it was a credible immigration policy means that people who should not be here have to leave, and the people who should be here get to remain. Basically, that's not doing it justice. So she was someone who the Democrats respected very much. Bill Clinton endorsed her recommendations. There were a large number of Democrats in Congress at that time in 1996 who endorsed her recommendations. And because of that, the 1996 immigration law that was passed was actually modeled on her recommendations. And unfortunately, she died before it passed. And the day after she died, Bill Clinton rescinded his endorsement of the recommendations and therefore his endorsement of this legislation. And a bunch of the Democrats peeled off because, they could, because she was gone. So had she lived a little bit longer, we would have a much different immigration system today than we do now, I think.
Wow. Does anybody even talk about it anymore?
Some people talk about it. Most people don't remember it. It was a long time ago. And most people wouldn't even be able to tell you who Barbara Jordan is, which is sad because she was a great woman.
I found it very, very interesting. And the first thing that popped into my mind is to make that a thing again.
Yeah. I mean, that's the part of the problem is I don't know who would be able to step into her shoes. Back then, we had a few Democrats who were at least objective about immigration, and we had some who were great on it. There were a couple of California Democrats who were fantastic on immigration, but I don't know who that would be now, and
Yeah.
if you, the country is so divided right now, and Congress is even worse. I mean, you couldn't put a Republican in charge of it because it would be completely dismissed by the Democrats. And I don't know that you could find a Democrat who'd be willing to do it.
I may have to write a Substack about Barbara Jordan. I just found it very interesting and, it would be just great if we could get back to something like that.
Yeah. And the worst part, well, other than Bill Clinton just like throwing coal on her, was some of the other commissioners actually turned on her after she died and completely disregarded the recommendations and said, well, no, that we didn't really find that. That was just her.
Wow.
So there was a lot of bad stuff at that point, but she was amazing. I actually got to testify before the commission a couple of times. And I mean, she was one of those people who she just kind of struck awe in you. She had this booming voice and I mean, she's like the female version of Clarence Thomas.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. All right, just two more things for you. So, one would be, what is something about immigration that you would want people to know that they really aren't talking about?
One of the things that I want people to know is that for the past 30 years, we have been admitting over 1 million legal immigrants every single year. On top of that, we let in roughly 1 million, probably more than 1 million temporary guest workers every year. And then illegal immigration is on top of that. So the reason that people are feeling the changes that immigration has wrought in the United States is because these numbers are massive. So I think we need to think about those numbers.
The reality of it, yeah. Okay. And then my last question, we asked you this a year ago, and I believe your answer was chain migration. But if you
Really?
could change one thing about immigration policy tomorrow, what would it be?
If I could pass any bill tomorrow, it would be the moratorium bill. If I could change one policy, it would still be chain migration.
Okay. I do have one more question. And this is because you brought up about Omar. And has Congress ever had the conversation, or anybody, the lawmakers, had any conversation about someone having that type of level in leadership that has an alliance to another country?
Historically, I don't actually know, but there have been kind of the backroom conversations going on about that probably since before Ilhan Omar, but certainly with her. I mean, there are so many questions, is she accessing classified information? What is she doing with it? I don't know if you noticed, but Rashida Tlaib over the weekend was talking about, don't even remember what she was talking about, but she referred to the US as they.
Yes.
Really? What? So, yeah, it's a conversation that we need to have, but it's here and there and kind of whispered in back rooms, but it hasn't really come to the forefront yet.
I think that needs to, big time. It's just really scary.
I think somebody did actually introduce legislation to prevent foreign-born people from being elected to federal office. I can't remember who did it, but I think that has actually been done.
Oh, good. All right. Well, is there anything else that you would like people to know?
I can't think of anything. I feel like we covered a lot.
We did. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. I can't believe it's been a year that we talked. But it just, this year with the immigration issue has just been, and I don't know why I've taken this as something that I want to fight for, or fight against, or however you want to say it. But it really has been probably the most talked about thing that I've done. So,
Yeah, you've
yeah.
great on.
Well, and I appreciate you. I really do appreciate your perspective and everything that you've done to combat this. And you're a force to be reckoned with for sure.
Well, I wish they would stop reckoning and start doing.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you, Rosemary. I appreciate you coming on with me and having this conversation. I thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, and I wish you the best of luck.
This has been Reasonable Arguments, News and Nonsense. There is so much BS on the mainstream media news, but you knew that. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon.